I had a friend of mine called Nick who got obsessed with a sort of quasi-religious cult, a sort of psychological well-being group called the Landmark Forum. I'm sure you've heard of them. Very like Scientologists. You pay a lot of money to go on courses, and then you have to evangelize those courses, try and get other people on those courses, and you're sort of meant to become sort of psychologically pure and sorted of all your problems. And he became absolutely obsessed with this. He came out of it in the end, I think 5, 6, 7 or 8 years later, I think, and realised what the hell was that all about. But at the time, it was very attractive to him. The reason I mention it is because there is there's a connection between the core of their teaching, which is to sort of make you kind of psychologically pure and to rid yourself of your demons, and an understanding of why your friends are going rogue on you, why your friends are turning to conspiracy theories, why they believe in weird sort of political extremism that we know has absolutely, well, I'm not going to say has no sense of truth. There probably is an echo of a ghost of a sort of a truth buried deep within, but by and large, these are lies in order for you to get down on your knees and kind of worship and support somebody who is a kind of godlike figure who is able to say almost anything and you will believe it. Quasi-religious, shall we say. I'm talking, obviously, we know who we're talking about at the moment. We know what kind of politicians attract that sort of attention. So, anyway, there he is at the Landmark Forum. And what is the core teaching? It's called personal rackets. Now, what is a personal racket? Well, psychologically, it's called a transactional model. And it means that a lot of the things that we believe have some benefit for us. We don't just believe anything for any sake. We tend to have beliefs which have some form of benefit or almost like a medicine for us. But we don't see that. So, for example, I guess that if you go back to psychology, transactional model would suggest that if you might say, I'm good for nothing, I can't do anything, I'm useless. That could be your thinking. Now, of course, that's not true. Nobody can be described as completely useless, but you may indulge in that thought and you may think that that thought is very negative, but actually the thought does have some benefit for you. It remains you in a kind of stasis. It forces you to remain in the situation you are, encourages the status quo. It means that you don't have to face your fears and go into the world to test your hypothesis about me being useless. So that's somewhere where there is a kind of a weird kind of benefit that you get from believing that you are useless. So it's not entirely negative thought. And so there's more and more of this personal racket is happening in the post-truth world. Why do people believe in kind of nutty, nonsensical, crazy, conspiratorial ideas? Why have they almost become, I wouldn't say mainstream, but certainly huge minority of people believe in the most weird things? I mean, there's the crass examples, of course, which is that like 80% of Americans believe in angels, or 70% believe they've been abducted by aliens, that kind of thing. But then we get into these sort of political ideas and sort of rather crude ideas, like in the UK at the moment, the idea that somehow salvation will be found if we can just revert to a kind of white tribal society where we play cricket all day and where, we only drink brown beer and everything's going to be great again. And also all the COVID conspiracies, and, there have been so many. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Okay, so you've got a personal racket. So like the person who believes that they're useless, but it has some benefit for them. Somebody who believes in a conspiracy theory or a crazy, nutty political idea, there is also a benefit for them. And to understand this a little bit more, I guess that we should start by talking about how things have changed in the sort of post Enlightenment era, and why we consider that the Enlightenment was a force for good, a force for great change, away from nutty, weird, supernatural, crazy beliefs, which was kind of almost the sort of common currency pre-Enlightenment. And of course, that common currency, was encouraged by state apparatus. They wanted people to be hyper-religious and weird and bow down to authority. They wanted the church and state to be combined. This was a wonderful tool of oppression. But post-Enlightenment, things were meant to get better. There was meant to be a kind of major political reform, which was the change of the separation of church and state. And now, of course, the church and state are coming together in a kind of quasi-religious, neo-Christian political worlds, which the extreme right are that's really the model that they're looking at, and the rest of it is just noise. Social progress was an idea as well. Don't leave children in the gutter anymore. Don't send them up chimneys, that kind of thing. Try and bring them into the fold somehow. Get into education and try to make laws that are rational, and based on kind of evidence and understanding and empathy and that kind of thing. And it was also this idea that, to be born into this world without asking, that you had a kind of universal right of some sort within a society. Well, all these things, of course, are going by the wayside now in this post-Enlightenment world. So the idea was that we were kind of progressing and civilizing ourselves and moving away from kind of weird superstitions. We're right now back to weird superstitions, and it's come back very, very quickly, due to the perfect storms that we understand already. It's the end of the post-war cycle, social media and political opportunism, okay, by the new trend of strong men, okay. And of course, it's also to do with what I've talked about so many times before, which is the failure of Western democracies. I don't really talk about Western democracies, I'm not an expert anywhere else, to actually address the changes since 1970, and they've left people struggling, and those people clearly, they want to have, they want to find a solution. And they're being offered a solution, but of course there's no solution in the kind of ideas that these new particularly right parties have. But they do attract support. So let's say it how it is. These beliefs are completely nutty. All right, there's no point even debating. I'm not even going to get a debate with somebody about whether astrology is a real thing. I'm not going to get into a debate with somebody about, whether the earth is flat. None of this and all of the other conspiracies to do with COVID vaccines and this and that and the other. Yeah, you can have a conversation about some of these things like vaccines, but to actually just talk about this stuff as if it's kind of some kind of real phenomena. It's just quite ridiculous, I think. Anyway, and so why is it now that we've got a swarm of this sort of craziness going on? How can this have happened so quickly after we spent 400 or 500 years kind of building a post-Enlightenment world? The clue's in the word enlightenment. Never mind. All right. Well, the problem is that this comes down to the personal racket. So it's pretty difficult being a human being. It's not an easy thing. It's easier for some than others. Generally, it's easier if you're kind of educated. I don't mean educated with books necessarily, although books are a great idea because they help you get inside the minds of other people. But just in terms of being able to deal philosophically with the world, actually, as much as anything else, to understand the phenomena of what it is that you are experiencing. instead of being pushed around like a little pinball. And so because it's very difficult, people look for, I've mentioned the apophenia that exists. So people look for patterns, or they look to try and find order in chaos and that kind of thing. So one example is that a conspiracy theory, okay, let's talk about a global conspiracy. Let's talk about the International Monetary Fund is just a conspiracy and part with the United Nations to keep everybody in, and the chemtrails and the fluoride in the water is to keep the populations kind of zombified. Okay, it instantly can make a kind of sense of what appears to be a very complex world. And it is kind of complex world, not because it's inherently complex, by the way, but because we've made it complex. Okay, but that's another story. Okay, so there's the benefit. It suddenly makes order out of chaos. That's the first one. Secondly, if you are adrift in this world, isolated, if you are frightened and fearful and cornered, then believing in a sort of conspiracy idea, a cultish idea, and believing very strongly in that despite any evidence means that you belong to a distinct group of people. And now with obviously the internet, social media, you can kind of link up with these people wherever they are. And that sense of belonging is an absolutely fundamental human need, I think, which is becoming, due to sort of, the rise of individualism since about 1970 again, has meant that, this is a wonderful way of having a sense of belonging. The other thing is that you need to find somebody to blame for your situation, okay? And this is another benefit. It's not your responsibility. It's not even it's hardly even a political thing, to be honest, not often. It's more to do with there being sort of evil characters out there. Obviously we talk about immigrants, but it could be, any other kind of group, or it could be it could be a corporate power or something. But you need to find a kind of moral scapegoat for your frustration. Now, some of this may be true. It may well be that the structures that are in place at the moment are deeply unfair, that there is a systemic failure in trying to alleviate suffering for whole groups of people, so that a few people can become extremely wealthy on the back of some of this stuff. And that's absolutely true. But this is why it's so ridiculous that those people with the kind of profile I'm talking about should vote for people like Trump and other right-wing parties who want to privatize everything. They want to desocialize the system that can help you. And yet, their policies, such that they have, are popular among people who will gain the least from this. This is why it's a very peculiar thing. It does also give you a sense of identity as well, doesn't it? To sort of have a strong belief. I mean, let's look at a sort of crass idea, which is that supporters of a certain football team, who live and breathe, Man United or Chelsea or Arsenal or Tottenham, wherever, Bayern Munich, what's the purpose of that experience there, that you want to watch, 11, 23-year-olds running around a pitch, okay, and you are so entwined with that emotionally and viscerally, even though if you actually stepped back, it would be a kind of ludicrous thing really that's going on there, but in the moment, in the experience, it gives you this wonderful sense of identity, and that's a huge benefit to you. Okay, so most of the time there is a personal racket involved. People don't just believe things because actually they think they're true. There's normally something else going on underneath, some other personal benefit they're getting from this, and there you go. It reminds me a little bit And these conspiracy theories, I've said before, they used to be kind of quite cute and cuddly, didn't they? But the propaganda that's around at the moment is really at another level. But, you know, it's always been there. Now, none of you will remember Chuck Harder. Chuck Harder was the American radio host from about 20 years ago, and he had a syndicated radio show called For the People. And in the way, I suppose, it was a right-wing conservative channel, but if you listen to it now, if you can find archive, it was a very different tone. It was a kind of much more a sort of gentle conservatism, shall we say. But I do remember that when, long before, you know, the current monsters of today, you know, like basically murderous Democrats and anti-woke arses and, you know, the lefties who want to destroy the world. This is the latest, of course. Before that, and when, you know, Canada was the great enemy. The enemy was Iran. You know, America had a big problem with Iran, and so I remember he had a show in 2007, and he had a guest on, and the guest was on, and he was talking about the fact that Iran needs to be destroyed. The reason he gave was because, and this was quite a popular idea at the time, you've all forgotten about it, I'm sure. There was a rumour going around, you know, do you remember the rumour recently about the the Democratic paedophiles that kind of had a child sex dungeon under a pizza place or something? Well, going back to 2007, there was a conspiracy theory that the Iranians had planted 17 nuclear bombs across America and were waiting to detonate them. And this was quite a kind of commonly spoken about, you know. I mean, I'm not saying it was spoken about, you know, in all political circles, but certainly it came up, and it came up on the Chuck Harder show. And they were talking about it for an hour. And of course, those bombs never went off, but huge amounts of airtime in those right-wing channels were given to it, and people believed it. You know, these things come and they go. And you see echoes of that kind of nonsense now, and particularly in the COVID, which really accelerated the conspiracy idea. Anyway, I'm rambling again, but I just wanted to talk about the fact that most people, when they believe something that's crazy, they tend to be getting some benefit from that belief. So there's something else going on psychologically. There is you know, it's a transaction in a way. We don't tend to do or believe things which are detrimental to our own selves. All right, that's enough of that. There's a lot going on in here, I know, but, you know, I just wanted to say that when I had a spare 10 minutes, so thanks very much.